Hello.
Our story begins on Mustafar. R2-D2 sat idly by his ship. He could see from his position his golden friend C-3PO walk out of the ship and lift Padme up onto a stretcher before bringing her inside the vessel. The little droid cooed worriedly as he watched the queen that he guarded for the last 13 years. He was her and Anakin's droid. His optics moved around, scanning the area for Obi Wan and Anakin, wondering where they went. He could see the beginning of a fight, one of which he couldn't really comprehend. What was Anakin doing? Why was he fighting with his best friend? R2 couldn't understand the emotions of sentience, but even at that, he also couldn't ever imagine fighting with his best friend. Aside from little quarrels, nothing larger than a friendly disagreement with 3PO. R2 wasn't known for always following orders. He was known for being reckless, like Anakin, but he didn't know how to react right now. He wanted to listen to Anakin, but he also felt the desire to follow 3PO and see what happened to his close friend Padme. R2 decided not to, and so he waited patiently. As he shuffled back and forth by himself, he watched Obi Wan walk back to the ship. R2 lowered his first wheel and started moving forward slowly. He then watched the vessel slowly lift off, without Anakin. He creeped to the edge of the platform and watched Obi Wan and 3PO vanish into the smoke plumes covering the planet. R2's optics moved back, and he started to in towards the facility, before using his rocket boosters to move away, scanning the entire area. He could see from where he was that Obi Wan was covered in char. His outfit was once clean, and it was turned into an ashy array of filth. R2 moved along the lava river and eventually saw a husk of flesh trying to scale the side of the riverbank. He lowered himself down and looked at Anakin. He cried out in agony as he tried to get the name of R2 out of his mouth. Anakin couldn't speak. His vocal cords were shredded. R2 shot out an attachment cable and it fell right in front of Anakin. He used his metallic hand to grip it, and the little droid pulled him up to the side of the lava bank. Anakin cried out in pain as he got to the top, and R2 rolled him over gently and began spraying Bacta on his burnt skin. Anakin was in pain as he felt the Bacta soothe his wounds. While the wounds would never fully heal, especially after the damage done to them, this would at the very least be helpful. The trip from Mustafar to Coruscant was long, and because R2 was actively treating the damage, it could help Anakin's future progress and healing. R2 ran out of Bacta as he lifted off to the ship and brought it back, landing and getting out with more canisters of Bacta and covering Anakin's body with it. The worst part about the Bacta was the fact that it was helping him heal, but it made the pain even worse. The shock of coldness against the burnt skin was an unbelievable pain. What was hurting Anakin the most was the fact that he felt love and compassion for the droid. If he was focusing on the dark side, he would have been able to keep himself alive off of pure hate. But with his adoration of his droid, he was fading from life. He used his hatred for Obi Wan to fuel him, but R2 was sadly killing him with love. Ironic. R2 was helping Anakin physically, but emotionally, it was pushing him further from the dark side. When Palpatine arrived, R2 was still covering Anakin and Bacta. The little droid was preparing to bring Anakin into a ship and fly it away to a system close to here. But now that Palpatine was here, the little droid waited patiently. Sidious walked up, almost disappointed that it was R2 that saved Anakin, but he was genuinely surprised that Anakin survived the burning. No man would have survived that, likely not even Maul. He patted the droid on the head and went to Lord Vader's side. Anakin was ushered back into the Emperor's shuttle, and Sidious walked with R2 as he followed Palpatine into the vessel and then departed for Coruscant. Upon their arrival, R2 was permitted to follow Sidious in and watch Anakin transform into Darth Vader. His mask and armor were darker than under the bed, his breathing apparatus screamed asthma, and Anakin's voice suddenly transformed into James Earl Jones. It was very jarring for R2. Vader stood up and learned that Padme was killed by Anakin Skywalker. It was horrifying, and for R2, it was circuit-breaking. He didn't know how to even comprehend this truth. He saw Padme unconscious, but the fact that Anakin killed her was unbelievable. R2 followed everyone around, as Sidious began instructing his new apprentice on how to be a Sith. Sidious didn't know how long he would tolerate Vader having his little droid Shadow following him around, but he knew it wouldn't be long. He was appreciative for R2 saving Anakin's life. As he was thinking about how he could get rid of the little astromech, he decided that the perfect ploy was for Vader to destroy the droid, but that would take time. Sidious walked across a catwalk and raised his hands, showing Vader and R2 a crowd of people, and above them was Masameda, burning Yoda's lightsaber and everyone else's found inside the Jedi Temple. an era of the Jedi had come to its bitter end. Sidious turned to Vader and the droid, and they continued forward, telling Vader about how they would build from the Republic an incredible empire, one that couldn't be taken over. Sidious could sense the tight bond between Vader and the astromech, so he let it build, knowing that at one point, after the various Jedi around the galaxy were dead, he would force Vader to make a choice. If Vader chose Sidious, then he would remain a Sith. If he chose the droid, then he would be as expendable as any other Quark in the system. Sidious made sure to establish boundaries between Vader and the droid. Skywalker would be sent out to deal with Jedi Masters such as Master Infilla and Eth Koth. In between missions, he'd be in his bacta tank, but thanks to R2, Anakin's wounds were healing faster than they would have otherwise. There was very little interaction between Anakin and R2 because of this. Sidious intended to drive a wedge between them, but the astromech was as loyal as an Anoba. Despite not having the chance to really be around his friend, he was always waiting for him to come back, just like he did on Mustafar. While R2 was relatively traumatized by the event, he was more worried about caring after his master. He would power down inside of Vader's personal chambers and wait for him to return. When Vader walked in, R2 would power up and follow him around as Vader murmured to himself. The Dark Lord would enter the bacta tank, R2 would pull up to the edge and plug into it, maximizing the healing capacity of the bacta tank until Anakin fell asleep. There weren't a whole lot of conversations between the two of them. Despite this affection and love for R2, especially because of the early healing that he was able to do for him, there was always something else that irked Anakin. R2 was a constant reminder of what he'd lost. R2 was a wedding gift from Padme. Instead of giving rings like most newlyweds, they exchanged droids, and R2 was the reminder that Anakin couldn't shake. The burden that was not just his greatest failure, but a life-changing decision that he wasn't sure if he regretted or not. While he and R2 didn't speak regularly, Anakin did speak to himself inside of his mind. He wasn't able to communicate verbally to R2 while inside of the bacta tank, but everything within the corners of his head were shared daily. These conversations with himself were less talks and more vicious debates. Name-calling, self-humiliation, defamation. He ripped himself apart, and because Palpatine said it was Anakin Skywalker who, in his anger, killed the former senator of Naboo, he couldn't let it go. And it was Anakin Skywalker who fought Obi Wan Kenobi, the lesser being as Palpatine referred to him, and still lost. It was his failure, time and time again, and Skywalker was fed up with it. But what could he do? All of these revolving thoughts were like poison. Each jab was another reason to not care about the one life he had to live. Vader or Skywalker, did it really matter? Not really. Anakin wanted this to end. He always wanted a life of conscience, as his friend Palpatine always said, and now he was nothing but a glorified errand boy. He felt like the same failure he was before he met Padme again. He felt like the same slave he was when he was in Watto's shop, and he felt like a lesser being altogether. Vader hated Obi Wan, Anakin adored him. Still, Vader wanted to destroy everything Obi Wan was, but Anakin wished he could tell his former master how it wasn't his fault. He knew that Kenobi would blame himself too, and Anakin didn't want that for him. Though the shared belief between both of these personalities was the fact that Obi-Wan Kenobi was a far better instructor than Darth Sidious. Palpatine was cruel in his nature. He didn't care about Vader in any way, shape, or form, and now, for Vader, he was left to his own thoughts. Instead of dwelling at his own mercy or lack thereof, his little droid started speaking to him when he was in his bacta tank. R2 knew he wouldn't get a response, but the little droid felt abandoned. He potentially saved Anakin's life, and they hadn't had a conversation in weeks or months. R2 wasn't even sure. He turned himself off so many times that all of it was just a blur. All the little droid knew is that the man he once loyally served was no longer present. He was just angrily sitting in silence. Before all of this happened, when Anakin was still General of the 501st, he and R2 would spend several hours with each other every day. When Ahsoka was still a Jedi, it would be during her training. When she left, it was when Anakin was working on his vessel. The two of them were always close, and R2 was pretty much following Anakin around like a shadow. Now, he never left Vader's chambers. He wasn't allowed to. He woke up, greeted Vader before he left, and when he came back, waited for him to be lifted into his bacta tank, and then maximized the tank itself before setting himself back to sleep. Droids weren't meant to feel emotions, but the closest sentient emotion it could be compared to was depression. R2 was isolated. All he saw were the four corners of his solitude, There were no windows, no anyone to communicate with, just silence, and a disheveled Anakin Skywalker and darkness, specifically when he turned his own lights out. The little droid spoke to Anakin this day, never, ever referring to him as Vader. To R2, there was no Vader, only Anakin Skywalker. The droid knew that Anakin could understand some things, but he made all of his verbal thoughts visible through a hologram. The couple days that Vader was gone, presumably murdering a bundle of Jedi, due to the visible damage on his armor, R2 wrote up a data drive that he wanted to share with his friend, and so Skywalker, after a tiresome mission, prepared to go to sleep when his little droid broke his own fixation on self-hatred. Vader looked down, his yellow eyes hiding the once ocean blue glow Anakin Skywalker once had. R2 beeped and booped like a child might, the words appearing in front of Anakin as he read them to himself. It was hard on his eyes, but he could see everything R2 was saying as he listened, picking out the words he knew. R2's little speech went like this. He referred to Vader as Anakin and called him out, requesting that he break free from this prison. It wasn't who he was. Whatever Anakin wanted may have been gone, but it didn't mean the memory of those lost had to be ripped to shreds by obsolescence. Anakin was a fierce warrior, Obi Wan knew that, Ahsoka knew that, and Padme knew that, but to be sentient from R2's understanding was so much more than being a warrior. As a droid, R2 couldn't tell Anakin the emotions to feel or how to even process them, but he could tell that Anakin wasn't maximizing his own circuits, or in translation, he wasn't following his heart. R2 knew Anakin, expressing that his silence was all the more telling, the lack of emotion was all the more devastating, and his obedience to a master was nothing short of repeating history. R2 then continued, telling Anakin that he was far greater than a slave. Padme was right about Palpatine, especially in her distrust of him, but the little droid stopped. He told Anakin that he wasn't going to stick around here anymore. He missed the times the two of them spent together. He missed how they cultivated the goodness of those around them, and how they were able to build awesome things together. Anakin hadn't been a mechanic in however long they'd been trapped inside this prison. He may have lost some of the most important people in his life, but that did not mean he had to lose himself. Anakin was above that, and there was no reason in defaming his legacy out of the name of depression. R2 twirled his head back to the door, and then back to Anakin. He told Skywalker that he would always be a loyal droid to him, but he could no longer do this. He had no purpose, and without purpose, R2 himself was depressed. As a droid, they weren't supposed to understand these things, and that he wasn't sure even if he comprehended it himself. But this wasn't something he could continue to do. He wouldn't sit by idly and watch his friend destroy himself. If that's something Anakin was content on doing, then he would just leave him to himself. But he wanted Anakin to know his thoughts before he came back and his little blue friend was gone forever. It couldn't be seen, especially not with the backdrop surrounding his eyes, but Anakin's tears were flowing. Despite the damage done on Mustafar, his tear duct still worked, and he was in more pain than Palpatine could have ever put him through. R2 is Anakin's first droid off of Tatooine. He was his best friend. He went to the ends of the galaxy to save this little droid during the war, whether it be totally replacing his body twice or going into Separatist territory to save him. R2 was someone that Anakin could not lose, and perhaps as his time as Darth Vader went by, he took his little droid friend for granted. Anakin looked to a control and used the Force to press it, as the device leveraged him out of the bacta tank, slowly putting him together and rebuilding the Dark Lord of the Sith. Vader stepped to the ground and got to his knees, next to R2. His heavy metallic hand was rested on R2's head, and he told him that there was no way he could do it. The heavy breathing of Darth Vader echoed out after each word. Vader's booming voice was such a change to the little droid. He only now realized how he hadn't heard his terrifying friend in this new form. He saw the transformation, but he never saw who Anakin had become. Everything he was the definition of a monster, a man turned into a cybernetic mess like General Grievous, and for a moment, the little droid thought his time had been wasted. For a very short moment, he saw his reflection in Vader's mask, and he saw that they were no longer the same together. Before Anakin spoke again, R2 recollected a moment in time when he and Anakin were working on the Jedi Starfighter, the yellow one, and they were on their way to Anaxis, Ringovinda, or Coruscant. Honestly, who cares? All R2 knew is it was just the two of them. He looked at Anakin the same as he did now, and Anakin was on his knee, with his hand on R2's head, with his eyes fixated on his little best friend. It was much harder than it was to see now, but R2 could see his reflection in Anakin's eyes, and he could see the love emanating from his friend, as Anakin expressed his own love for his little pal. In the moment, that felt like a century ago. In the moment, it felt like that bond was gone, as Lord Vader took over. But Anakin said the words, telling R2 that he loved him, expressing his fondness for the little droid, and appreciating him staying here, loyally, over the months since Mustafar. Anakin on the inside was dying. He wanted to be free, but there was simply no way to make it work. R2 responded with a lack of understanding. Anakin Skywalker would have never settled for the status quo. When their backs were against the wall of Ryloth, they gave control to a 14-year-old Jedi Padawan who never held command, as the two of them basically committed war crimes. When Anakin's student was convicted of a bombing at the Jedi Temple, he didn't stand by idly. He went out and found the culprit. So why wait now? Why be complacent now, when every day of his life had been about personal and individual growth? Why give up now when the universe was in his hands? It would never be easy, but the Anakin Skywalker that R2 knew never would back down from a challenge like this, no matter how large or how small the feat might be. Vader sat in silence. The only thing audible, aside from the monitors controlling the bacta tank, was Darth Vader's breathing. Finally, after moments of continuous patterns of Vader's breathing, there was a word, one confirming what R2 had said. A moment where Vader for the first time stopped focusing on destroying himself, and a moment where he considered everything Anakin Skywalker was. As Vader, he was geared to hate Anakin for his weakness, but who he really needed to hate was Sidious. Anakin made mistakes, and those fallacies led him to this position in life. But it was not Anakin who manipulated himself. It was not Anakin who convinced him that the darkness would save Padme. All of his months of tiresome pain were leading to the eventual destruction of Anakin Skywalker, not the birth of something stronger. Vader would never be stronger than Anakin, because he was created to be a monster, a strewn-together mess of limbs and circuitry, keeping together a man that was nothing more than a slave for a new master. Vader's rage grew, but then, instead of rising, it sloped, falling into the floor. Anakin removed his helmet. Breathing hurt without the mask, but he wanted R2 to see, because he knew that R2 watched him until he slept. Anakin's eyes no longer were covered in yellow. Instead, their ocean blue had returned, and Anakin told R2 that this time, they would make things right. They would take everything they had learned, and they would make sure the Emperor was dealt with. The following few weeks, Anakin would play the role of Vader. He would kill a Jedi or two during this time, which did not force him further down the dark path of Vader. To him, there was no difference between the Jedi and the Sith. They were both bad for the people of the galaxy, and they were both pools at an unquenchable lust for power. Corruption fed both of these religions, and Anakin had no intention to allow them to persist. First, the Sith needed to die. The Jedi weren't influential enough to do anything anymore, and honestly, in his own mind, it was better to kill a Jedi than let them spend a lifetime suffering for a code that no longer pertained to their galaxy. R2 and Anakin spent their time, instead of inside bacta tanks, preparing for a blow to Palpatine. R2 was really encouraging Anakin to be his best self, which meant he would replace Palpatine, instead of letting someone else become his new master. R2 had all the receipts, all the times that Anakin was a slave to something or someone, and he was tired of watching it happen. The little droid was also painted black to fit in with Imperial droids, and allowed out of Vader's chambers to begin his work. R2 was testy. Being locked away for a couple of months like a storage container wasn't his idea of friendly. While he wasn't quite the eventual menace of Choppenheimer, R2 planned on making sure there was a convention named in his honor. Sometimes Vader was a little jarred by the rancid ideas his little friend came up with, but R2 wasn't backing down. He was furious. These thoughts based around losing Padme, the child, Anakin for months, and his other friends. Those being the clones, other Jedi, and even other astromechs. This was his revenge tour as much as it was Anakin's, and Anakin would be the architect of its foundation. The staging for Palpatine's demise was set weeks after their heart-to-heart, and truthfully, demise was probably too kind. R2 was well aware that Vader's suit was too weak to handle electricity from Palpatine, so he devised a contraption to make Sidious crumble. It was an audio torture device, strewn together by Vader and R2 in their little chamber of evil. At this point, R2 was becoming the Sith apprentice as Anakin backed into a more Jedi-like form. Regardless, Vader and R2 were requested to the Emperor's chambers. He was going to have Vader kill his astromech, which was something the two of them were assuming would happen. It was the final step to becoming Vader. Honestly, at this point, what wasn't a final step to become Vader? Kill all the Jedi in the temple, fight Obi Wan, kill Infala, and then 10 more Jedi, including a monk that no longer served their religion. Like, what did Eth Koth have to do with anything? Keep it going, seriously. If Vader didn't cave at this point, R2 may have gone mental, honestly. Vader knelt before his master, and R2 sat at the door as Sidious did his typical gaslighting, and he told his Sith apprentice to destroy the astromech, kill off Anakin Skywalker once and for all, and let a new era of Sith be born. As he was saying this, R2 was plugging into the wall. Sidious pointed and asked what he was doing, and Vader looked up, throwing his hand forward and catching Palpatine off guard, throwing him into the desk with the Force. He was confused as two sound speakers lifted off the ground. They were connected by a magnetic tie, and they vibrated violently, forcing Palpatine's head to reverberate with ear-piercing noise, not audible from outside the device. Vader stood up as Sidious tried to get himself out, but he couldn't. He was on his knees with his ears popping, completely losing the ability to hear anything. He screamed, but his cries were inaudible just as the noise. But he was the Dark Lord of the Sith, and he attempted to make sure they died for this treachery. Using his pain to fuel his power, he lifted his hand, and R2 twisted the knob, releasing waves of nanobombs. These weren't meant to rip an explosion in the chamber. These were meant to tear skin from bone. These little bombs inserted themselves into skin and went to work, causing Palpatine to lose his focus as his apprentice stood outside of him, watching pieces of his body tear apart. The little droid wasn't finished yet, as he beeped to Vader, who backed up. These little bombs weren't even fully activated. Due to R2 wanting to send a message, he also made sure these bombs were equipped with an actual explosion, so it detonated, ripping Vader's left hand off and throwing him backwards as it incinerated Palpatine. But that wasn't the end of it. R2 was pissed off with Yularen, so the bridge of his personal Venator was also obliterated, as well as the reactor. So if Yularen was lucky enough to survive, his last moments would be plummeting to the ground. Yularen had just entered the bridge, and he was blown off his feet, and then got to watch himself plummet to the ground. R2 got the best of both worlds and didn't even know it. Accidentally, that same ship smashed through a couple skyscrapers too, just for fun. Due to the bombs radiating in such a large area, it seemed more like a rebel attack. Vader looked like he was trying to save Palpatine, and that's how everything was played. Vader was the one who tried to save Palpatine from a separatist attack, and he lost his arm. Masameda, who bent at the knee just to keep power, would do whatever he needed to do to make sure he still had a position in the Empire. Vader immediately took the role of interim emperor, and because Sidious never planned on being replaced, it was impossible for the Senate to counter this point. So while the Empire reacted to this vicious attack made by former CIS loyalists, Anakin did a bait and switch with old Sheev. Without having to bend to the Sith Lord, Anakin began working on getting some semblance of his old self back. He was working as a mechanic. R2, due to how frequently Anakin could lose something, had spare forearms made for Anakin, so when he decided to be like himself again, he got these for Skywalker, being that they were still inside the Jedi Temple, which they had access to. Due to missing two arms, R2 had to flip one of the hands, but it all worked out. All they needed to do was add more for what else he was missing, like a full arm and two legs. But the main point being that Anakin no longer had a very painful suit to wear. He had hands he was more familiar with using that could actually do mechanical work without being too large and blocky. This actually was something that would be very integral to Anakin's healing journey, because he didn't care about being a political mastermind. He just revealed himself to be Anakin Skywalker, the survivor of the Purge, the one who protected Palpatine from the Jedi during Order 66, and then tried to save him from a CIS attack. The public was very confused by this, and it was a whole conspiracy started by various media sources. But the point being, Anakin Skywalker was able to work on his body instead of running the Empire. Those powers went to Masameda because he was desperate to not be killed, which Anakin was never going to do, but never told him that he wouldn't do. The public had a very weird vibe about this entire situation. They weren't sure if what the visor said was true, or if it was propaganda in the propaganda machine, but it realistically didn't matter. Palpatine was dead, and the Empire was responding with hostility. The former separatist worlds were facing the wrath of a fully militarized regime, one that planned to focus on galactic domination. Being that Masameda was being a survivor, he was making amends with Anakin, trying to do anything he could to make sure that they could have a strong relationship. Anakin was able to listen to Moss while he worked on fixing up his own body. The new armor was much tighter and fit like his old limbs. R2 also used the web to find a device that could be added with surgery to Anakin, so he didn't have to wear the mask anymore. The dynamic between Anakin and R2 was really important to their growth in this new era. Anakin then focused on his rule as Emperor. He wasn't really sure how he could actually be a good teacher, but he never cared about politics. But he remembered his conversations with Padme, specifically the first one about politics on Naboo, the one where he talked about making people do what was right. It was a funny little moment, one where he was teasing her about being a senator, and he decided that it would be right to be a good leader for her memory. And instead of resulting to a mundane life as a political leader, Skywalker, as famous general, decided it would be good to go to war. The Outer Rim was riddled by criminal leaders, and Anakin was going to bring the Empire together in one effort. He regretfully let the former Separatist worlds take the brunt of the blame for the execution of Palpatine, but he was able to turn the attention away from them when he quote-unquote revealed that the Outer Rim was responsible for the heinous attack on their Emperor. The Empire rallied, and war was waged. The clones, who were months away from being phased out, were put back to work, and given purpose, as well as the rest of the Empire. They had a purpose and a goal, and then they went in. Anakin, as the current leader, was wearing robes like Palpatine once wore. As his hair was slowly growing back, he was wearing his dark Jedi robes to keep the scars hidden until they faded away. These scars were really gnarly from his surgery, and he just didn't want to show them off yet. He was able to breathe without the mask though, as he and his best friend moved into the Outer Rim. There was some fear that Mas Amedda would betray him, but it never came. What instead came from it was a bolstering of Imperial patriotism. They saw him as the individual to unite the Empire in a way that Palpatine never could. Anakin was a frontline warrior, leading troopers in the battles against the Syndicate armies and fleets. He brought the people their victory and gave them a reason to support his movements. Anakin didn't know what bureaucratic process would follow this war, but he did know that finally, after years of wishing the Jedi could get it done, he'd be able to bring peace to the Outer Rim. Anakin wouldn't ever go to Tatooine personally, but he wouldn't really need to be there. The Hutts relocated to Nal Hutta as the crime syndicates all brought their forces together, including slave labor forces, to fight the Empire in one final battle at the Hutt home world. They didn't stand a chance. Admiral Coburn came in with a massive Imperial fleet, one outfitted with an Imperial Star Destroyer, and they tore the syndicates to shreds. They stood no chance. As Skywalker was finishing up his tour of the Outer Rim, he called for a propaganda shot at one of their victorious worlds. So on the landing platforms of the former Pike Syndicate on Obadiah, he would announce victory to the rest of the galaxy, showing that they had done it together. That was the message, together. When he stepped away from his victory speech, before his victory tour, he was approached by a lightsaber. Anakin had interactions with the Inquisitors, and they were semi-loyal, but this wasn't that. It was the former Grand Master. Yoda felt Sidious' death through the Force and decided to see what caused it. When he learned that Anakin was the Emperor, he came out to stop him. Little odd, but Yoda pointed his lightsaber forward and told Anakin to surrender. Anakin was just confused as he asked Yoda why he was being hostile. They just liberated the entire corner of the galaxy. Yoda tried to speak, but Anakin cut him off, reminding him that it was his order and his republic that abandoned the Outer Rim after the Great Fair of 232 and the fall of Starlight in 230. So maybe, instead of confronting the resolution, he should see why he was the problem. Little jarring, but Anakin had been, with his time, reading. It wasn't something he particularly liked prior to becoming a Sith, but he liked it now. Something about getting lost in stories or history brought his mind a sense of peace, especially after his trauma. So he was more educated than he was when Yoda knew him before. Anakin stepped towards Yoda's lightsaber, and he put his face right towards the blade and allowed the emerald glow to cover his face. Skywalker looked Yoda dead in the eyes and said that he thought the Jedi didn't exact revenge. Or he thought Jedi didn't kill unarmed individuals. He stood up and walked away, allowing Yoda to sit with his attempt to kill the Emperor. As Anakin got close to his personal shuttle, Yoda spoke up. Anakin turned back and he saw Yoda deignite his lightsaber, as he told him that he had a secret that he would like to tell him. R2 rolled down the ramp and stood next to Anakin as the news was revealed. Padme survived and had twins. She gave birth to Luke and Leia, and then she died. This revelation was very jarring and unexpected, but what came of it was the challenge. The Emperor delegated Masameda to conducting the next several steps of the Victory Tour, before Anakin was brought back to lead parades and victory celebrations across the galaxy. The clones that served in the war, one that lasted for only 4 months, were celebrated as well. Anakin met the children and had a lot of awkward silences with Yoda. The meetings with both sets of adoptive parents were very rough. Bail was standoffish and Owen kicked Anakin out. It would be up to Anakin to make amends with these people so that he could have control over his family. Bail told Obi Wan long before he arrived on Tatooine, and Anakin missed Kenobi by mere minutes. Skywalker was super busy and he was moving from system to system on his victory tour, as well as trying to make amends with these people that had his children. So a lot of his energy was going outwards instead of inwards, but his adoration for his children did it to him. Bail saw that. While he didn't like the role of Emperor, Anakin was doing a very good job with it. His work really changed the trajectory of the Empire. Without Anakin's interference, it would have become an autocratic system, one that was built on a military complex with very little regard for its citizens. Anakin didn't know about all that, but the war boosted credits for the government and allowed more circulation of funds into the public systems. Skywalker felt a hole in his heart repair when he learned of the children. While Bail and Owen had their reasons for disliking Anakin, Bail was willing enough to see this change as a permanent one. He had spoken to Padme about Anakin numerous times, and as she said on her deathbed, there was the belief that he was a good man. It was true. His reign as Emperor was far from evil. He was being a good person and he was helping people. Bail was very similar to the Jedi. He was willing to forgive if there were serious motivations to make a change. Anakin's Inquisitors were mostly dead, so it's not like there was evil around him. They were dead due to the attack of the Outer Rim. They were kind of useless. The rest of them were being tasked with impossible missions, ones that would eventually claim each of their lives because Anakin didn't like them. Skywalker and Bail were the first ones to establish a relationship, but the trouble was how they would go about sharing the children. Both of them had valid reasons to want to have Leia. Bail and Breya adopted her when Anakin was Vader and not present, and Anakin was the father. So they would spend time debating ideas, peacefully and amicably, to make sure that it wasn't just what they wanted, but what would be the best for the Princess of Alderaan. What came from Owen and Beru was the two of them letting go of Luke, because they found out that Beru was pregnant, so why not? It would sadly be a miscarriage, but it would result in Anakin getting his son back, before they lost their child. Anakin, and thanks for their kindness, would make sure they weren't forced to live on a moisture farm and brought them to Coruscant, where they would have a chance to have their own kid. The harsh conditions of Tatooine led to the loss of their first child. On Coruscant, they'd have an abundant family. Bail and Anakin would agree to split their time with Leia, which would allow her time with her brother and also give her time with her father. It was something that was difficult for Anakin, but he was able to understand and appreciate that in the end it did work out for him. Skywalker inversely would rekindle with Ahsoka and Obi Wan, who would see him going through his healing, both physically and emotionally. It was a very challenging time for him, but by his side was always R2. The little droid was his best friend, and while old faces would become present again, they wouldn't be as close as R2 was. Anakin's empire would continue to grow outwards until he stepped back, slashing down the autocracy of the system and continued to live a life of freedom. His life was complete, and his legacy was that of a war hero, an emperor who reinstated a galactic government, the one who brought balance to the Force, all in the attempt to free himself from his own slavery. His life as a father would be as fulfilling as his healing journey. He would take on the role that he was always destined for, and eventually the bond between him and Leia would be stronger than the one between Bail and her. Anakin and Bail continued to have a strong relationship, as the Empire was restructured into a democracy, one that, unlike Palpatine's original plans, had no abuse of power and gave the people a system that truly cared for them. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Alexandria Reese, The Beginning and End, M, Django Fett Clone, Nick 5098, INTJ Recluse, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir Realm 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Ban, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Galaxy 66, Man Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortress Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with the First Names, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button, support me always. Check out the Patreon, cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So I think I went in a different direction. The idea of the title itself saying, what if R2 saved Anakin, seems like it's saving him from Mustafar, right? And I wanted that to be the subversion of expectations. I kind of wanted this story to be one between Anakin and R2. I wanted it to drag out past Revenge of the Sith, and so I wanted them to have this moment where they're working with each other and Anakin's working hard to become Vader, which is something he doesn't really want to do. The first few months of him becoming Vader are very back and forth, like he wants to go and apologize to Obi Wan, then he's like, I'll kill Eth Koth for some reason. So I wanted that back and forth to be present, but I also wanted R2's speech to him to be kind of the anchor of the story. So I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.